Hello and welcome back to Modern Jubilees. I want to address a comment that we got on another video in which we talked about how the Muslim prophets curse the Philistines and Canaanites in Jubilees. And this comment says, surely you know Muslims don't accept the Bible as an accurate depiction of the lives of former prophets of God. And this is a very, very important point and question and comment. And so let's unpack it here. First of all, in the Quran, famously, the Prophet Muhammad says that the Jews accept some parts of their Bible and not other parts of their Bible, and they are rebuked for that. That's a bad thing. So Muhammad and the Quran actually encourage the Jews and the Israelites to keep the entire Bible. And for those who don't, or those who pick and choose, they are called out as doing the wrong thing. And so in the actual Muslim Quran, if you read the whole paragraph, the whole surah, the idea is Jews need to not pick and choose and understand that their Bible and texts do still apply and are very important, and that the laws of Moses and that the laws that were passed down from the ancients and from the prophets apply and are important. Actually, the Israelites are the gatekeepers of this wisdom, this ancient history that is recorded in books like the Bible, the Pentateuch, and Jubilees, where we learn about all the ancestors in the time of Adam for the 10 generations until the time of Noah. And between Noah and Abraham are another 10 generations. And there are all these famous people and stories. And how do we know about them? Only through these ancient texts that we have that belong to the shared humanity, but that were best preserved by the Jews and the Israelites, but also Jubilees is best preserved by the Ethiopians. And so I make sure to give them lots of credit for that as well. They also preserved in their sacred South Semitic Gez language, Ethiopic, the holy texts like Jubilees. So surely I know Muslims don't accept the Bible. So first of all, we're quoting from Jubilees here. It's not even in the classic Bible. But this idea that Muslims can just reject outright, see, it's the same thing as the Christians. There are Christians who think that you can just, willy-nilly say, oh, the Bible was, it's done, it's finished, it's, what's the Nostra Aetate term? The church, therefore, cannot forget that she received the revelation of the Old Testament through the people with whom God in his inexpressible mercy concluded the ancient covenant. But in a different version, with whom God in his inexpressible mercy established the ancient covenant. That makes a lot more sense than concluded the ancient covenant. And that is a very, very important distinction. The idea that God concluded the covenant makes no sense, because if you study the Hebrew Pentateuch, it's very clear that these are covenants forever, for eternity, between Israel and God. So you can't just willy-nilly say, oh, God concluded that covenant, and basically the Old Testament is just old and it's been fulfilled and now we don't need it anymore. That is complete rubbish. And I think that a lot of Christians today who are allies of Israel understand nowadays, with the internet, with universality, we have the ability to be children of the universe, to be children of God. These divisions between these major religions can slowly melt a little bit. We can study one another's texts and not be stuck inside of these dogmas, these ideas that, oh, you must stay away from the other person's texts. No, look at it. Go read the Quran, understand what it's like, understand where their mindset is, and the New Testament, and the Hebrew Bible, and the Bhagavad Gita, and a million other texts. To understand a culture, go read their text. The Falun Dafa have their own text. People have all over the world these big sects, these big groups of people, and they follow a certain book. It's very important to them. And there are followings nowadays around all sorts of novels and books. But these ancient texts are very, very important, and they're very unique. So let's go with the Boston College translation here. The Church of Christ acknowledges that in God's plan of salvation, The beginnings of its faith and election are to be found in the patriarchs, Moses and the prophets. Very important. This is in the fourth part of the Nostra Aetate. It professes that all Christ's faithful, who as people of faith are daughters and sons of Abraham, are included in the same patriarch's call, and that the salvation of the church is mystically prefigured in the exodus of God's chosen people from the land of bondage. On this account, the church cannot forget that it received the revelation of the Old Testament by way of that people with whom God in his inexpressible mercy established the ancient covenant, nor can it forget that it meaning the church, it draws nourishment from that good olive tree onto which the wild olive branches of the Gentiles have been grafted. The church believes that Christ, who is our peace, has through his cross reconciled Jews and Gentiles and made them one in himself. And that is a perspective. And in a way, it's true. In a way, those who come close to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are united and allied with the people of Israel and part of greater Israel. And that's a beautiful thing. However, this idea that you can say this covenant of the Hebrew Bible, of the Pentateuch, of the books of Moses has just been concluded is it's blasphemous, because if you actually study the Pentateuch, you see that this is many, many times referred to as an eternal covenant. And so it's got to figure itself out in terms of that Catholic Nostra Aetate, which does a lot of good, but also could use a little bit of fine-tuning at a certain point. And we saw with the last pope, who completely just put the kafia on baby Jesus, and turned Jesus into like some sort of Palestinian martyr as opposed to the Judean that he was. It was really a mess. And so we're hoping that this new pope is going to be more holy and truthful to the ancient texts. And that's the idea here. We should all be able to study the ancient texts, to study history, to study archaeology. There is a truth in this world. It's not just that everyone's got their own truth. No, God is true. God is one. This world is one. We're united. We're a united humanity. So again, going back to this comment, surely you know that Muslims don't accept the Bible. First of all, there's like, what, a billion Muslims? How many Muslims? 1.9 billion Muslims worldwide. All right, so we've got close to 2 billion Muslims. So I would never say that Muslims anything. Honestly, there's just too many types. There's too many different sects that believe completely different things. Okay, if you can have Muslims that are like the ones in Dubai, and you can have Muslims that are like the ones in Hamas or in the IRGC, then it really doesn't mean that much at the end of the day, other than they have a common book and a common name to their God. But the book also has very different interpretations and people who stress different parts and not other parts, ironically, because we were talking about that quote from the Quran that talks about not picking and choosing and rebuke for the Israelites for doing that. And so there's this big confusion. The Quran in itself is confusing because it's not like a giant text like the epic books of Moses, which are a sewed together enormous text of clear narrative. The Quran is giving you little bits of information. It's not even like the New Testament, which also gives you more stories. The Quran has these totally different surahs, and it jumps all over the place, back and forth through history. It stresses a lot of just stuff about the Jews. It's a little bit like a brainchild of Muhammad, but it's not a text of history. It's little snippets. It reminds me of how kids learn these days in school. Little snippets of information on different topics, and let's talk about it. That's how kids learn these days. But to have a true text like the Bible, like the Pentateuch, there's nothing like the books of Moses. Nothing compares to the Torah. And the only thing I can compare to the Torah is Jubilees. But for various reasons, but it's not the same. It's not the same in terms of its holiness. By far the holiest book in the universe, by far, is the Pentateuch, the books of Moses. That's just the reality. So do Muslims want to understand what I said in that last video that this comment is coming on, which has to do with the prophets cursing the Philistines and the Canaanites? If we study ancient history, if we study our collective history, we learn about who were the Canaanites, Where did they come from? When did they come? Why did they come? What are the circumstances around them going to that land? Same thing for the Philistines. Who do they come from? Where do they come from? When did they come? When did they go to the Holy Land? And what did they do there? What are the stories about them? We have them. We have these stories. We don't have to just dig in the ground and try to figure it out from scratch. We have these ancient stories. And the idea that there is this idea that is a corrupt idea, which is that the Bible is corrupted. The 5 books of Moses are best preserved of any holy text that I'm familiar with because of the extreme holiness of the text. Until today, when people are copying this text by hand, not only do they have to have another one open that they're copying from word by word, letter by letter, if any letter even touches another letter, it's no good. It has to be fixed. If anything is the slightest bit wrong with even one letter of this enormous text, it's no good. It has to be fixed. It can't be used. It's a very, very long tradition of keeping this text holy. The only place we see any difference in the Pentateuch is among the Yemenite scrolls. The Yemenites were cut off from all the rest of the Israelites for many, many centuries, and they have some 9 total differences in their text. And when I say difference, I mean like the tiniest little things that have no significance to the meaning of the text whatsoever, which is nothing like what we see in other traditions. You have different versions of the Quran. At a certain point, it was canonized and one was chosen. But it's nothing like the books of Moses where you have one scroll with one type of writing it, one type of lettering system. It doesn't change. And the same thing for the New Testament, by the way. There's many different versions of the New Testament until it became canonized. And they're not small differences. They're bigger differences because they're books, they're stories. It's not attributed the same holiness. Nothing compares to the books of Moses in terms of the holiness. So even though these curses against the Philistines and Canaanites come from the Book of Jubilees, still, it's very important to just get back to the reality. The reality is that the Christians and Muslims believe in Moses, call Moses a great prophet and leader. And if you understand that, you should at least open your mind to the ability to study the text, to read the text. Even a translation is better than nothing. To understand the narrative of the Bible. If you want to consider yourself someone who knows God or loves God or believes in God or follows God and his prophets, you need to read the books of Moses. This idea that you shouldn't go near the books of Moses because either A, they're fulfilled and so forget about them, or B, they're corrupted and so forget about it. No. Neither of those are true. Neither of those are accurate. And once you read this text, that'll become completely clear to you. There's no reason to keep yourself, now I'm just talking to the Muslims, there's no reason to keep yourself so limited that the only text you know is the Quran, which is these small little paragraphs and snippets. You can love that book all you want. But if you want to say that you know God or love God or follow God, you can't just listen like as if you're living in the 7th century and only listen to what your leaders tell you about, for example, the Jews or the Israelites or the nation of Israel. And so you only hear it secondhand. Oh, they got this holy book, they didn't follow it, and so they're so terrible, but we shouldn't look at it today because it's so terrible, it doesn't apply, it's corrupt. None of that is true. And we have now these ancient texts found by Bedouins, found by Muslims, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea. Those are 2,000-year-old texts. And there are other very, very ancient texts. The Torah is not corrupted. It's not. It's an incredible text. It's extremely clear if you read it. And I encourage everyone to read it. And that's the only thing that's going to get us to this time of peace. If you care about getting to a time of peace, a messianic time, day of judgment, whatever you want to call it, if you want to move forward as civilization, do not live in a box. Do not say that because you grew up with one tradition and everyone around you has one tradition, so you're going to stay and only be familiar with that tradition. It is the 21st century. We have the internet. We have all of these tools at our fingertips. And God is beyond any one religion. and God is beyond any one nation. But there is one true story to the history of this universe, and we have it. The Israelites are known as people of the book for having worked so hard for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before any other culture as a nation. And the story of how this nation came to be and what it's all about is right there in the Bible, and there's translations of it into every language, so there's no excuse at this point for this borut, this ignorance, this staying in a cave, this just convincing yourself that whatever you hear in your school or your mosque or sometimes your church that is so bad about the Israelites and the Jews, give yourself a chance to actually read the Pentateuch and then read also Jubilees. Understand our shared history, our shared civilization, our shared culture. So surely I know Muslims don't accept the Bible as an accurate depiction of the lives of former prophets of God. No, I don't know that at all. No, I don't know that, and I don't accept that, and it's not true, and it's not good, and it's not right. And because I care about these people, these 2 billion people, because I care about my Muslim cousins who come from the Arabs, who have no problem right now with the Israelites. Our closest allies right now are our true Arabs. But those who are, messed up, like the Iranians, the Iranian IRGC people who took over in 79, and they're creating this despicable thing. Now, the whole story of Muhammad and who he was and what happened in his time should be able to be analyzed. Do you think people don't analyze the books of Moses and say, should Abraham really have done that, almost sacrificed his son, and what is the context of this story, etc.? Thousands of years of exegesis and commentary and study and learning and dialogue and conversations about these stories has gone on, and that's what needs to happen. About the Quran, you can't just say, every letter is so holy. No, you're just appropriating what the books of Moses are. Those, every letter is holy. But in terms of Muhammad, he didn't even write down the Quran. He was speaking and people were writing it down. That's why it's a game of telephone. But even if he did prophesy once, then he would be considered a prophet, even though he's not an Israelite. So if you want to call him a prophet, fine. Does that mean everything he ever said and thought was divine, was God? No. Are you comparing him now to a God? Are you switching into now that Muhammad was God, meaning he never made a mistake and he never sinned? No, that's not human. And we're not talking right now about Jesus and their perspective. We talked about that in other videos. But if Muslims want to consider themselves monotheists, children of Abraham, children of Ishmael, then they can't be full of these lies. You have to understand Muhammad was a human being. He made mistakes. Learn from it. Reform. Islam requires reform. And that's what we see in the UAE and Bahrain. That's what we see right now in different Arab and Muslim countries that are waking up to reality. If you want to respect Abraham and the God of Abraham, you have to respect the children of Abraham and the nation of Israel that God very specifically forms, very intentionally forms, chooses, and tasks with various tasks. If you want to understand Israel, you need to understand this narrative of the books of Moses. And if you want to consider Moses a prophet and holy, then you need to read his book. And if you're going to pretend, it's so corrupt, I shouldn't even look at it, you're brainwashed. You're completely brainwashed. And you can fix it by just right now waking up and deciding that you're going to read those books. You're going to read those texts. You're going to read Genesis and Exodus and Jubilees. You're going to learn this narrative of our shared history and humanity, because the Quran is not enough. No one text is enough. This world is greater than just completely brainwashing yourself with one text that happens to be full of Jew hatred, and that's how we get crazy people who claim that they respect people like Moses and David while slaughtering and lying outright about those exact people at the same time. So Islam needs to have a reckoning, it needs to have reforms, and that's fine. Every people has reforms at a certain point. The Israelites used to give animal sacrifices in the temple. No more temple. We had to reform. Now there are prayers, spoken prayers. And now Christians also will sing these psalms, and Muslims also will say their prayers instead of giving animal sacrifices to pagan gods in Mecca. They reform now. They have the Kaaba. People reform. People change. We evolve. Life is about rolling with the punches. God does not change. And the Pentateuch does not change either. Our story of where we come from, the story of Noah, it doesn't change. I feel bad that people haven't had these same experiences that I was blessed to have, where me and families of different faiths will discuss the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the stories of Noah. What do you know about it? What's in your text? What's in your text? Let's compare texts. Let's study. Let's see what we can learn. That's what the future is. It's us coming together because we love God that much, that we will come together. If you're stuck in hatred, I feel very bad for you, but you can wake up from it. You can change, you can grow, and you can stop this poisonous hatred that fills the veins of people who claim to know God, and then they, rush out and commit atrocities that go against the most basic things in the name of Allah. All right, so let's continue this conversation. It's a very important conversation to be had. There's no reason for Muslims and Jews and Christians to be enemies. None. We're in the 21st century. It's very clear where we differed, where things went off the rails, and where things are coming back together and can very simply come back together and are back together. In many places around the world, you do see beautiful harmony, beautiful coexistence, blessings from one community to the next. Lo b'shamayim, it's not in the sky, it's not in the heavens, it's down here on earth with us. These ancient texts, this truth about God, and God itself is with us all. So may we all be blessed to see a time of peace soon and in our days. Thank you very much for listening and for watching. This is Modern Jubilees, and we will see you next time.